What would you tell parents, raising their child who's 8, 9, 10 years old and they're experiencing sport, like not to make the amount of parents I've heard say to me, well, my kid's not gonna be a basketball player because me and my wife are not tall. And I find myself just fascinated by that logic that we're trying to place like innate characteristics on 8, 9, and 10-year-olds and trying to project that into the future to determine what sport your child should be exposed to at an early age. I just find that very fascinating.
Well, call it 40 years ago, we first got exposed in the West to some of the practices that were taking place, in Eastern Bloc countries, Eastern Europe. And they were definitely scanning, probably still are at some level, scanning early biodata to better place, from a physiological standpoint and a cognitive aptitude, place people in environments where they think they could be most successful. Now, here in the West, we value individualism much more. But we don't really do that. But your point is it genetic? Do you environmentally have influences, or is it something that you can sort out on your own, with your culture? It's both.
Like anything, it's a combination of both.
It's a combination of it. Right. It's harder if your biology or your physiology has some deficits relative to the other peers. Right. But look at Spud Webb.
No, there's always exceptions.
Yeah, look at Russ. Yeah. Russell Wilson, one of the great, quarterbacks, and definitely doesn't fit the prototype of the way that it's supposed to look. But then he, with his mobility and his other attributes, he was able to shift and work in ways that, led us to a Super Bowl, 2 of them.
And mindset.
Absolutely.
And I know that's really your specialty,
Yeah.
and you brought up Russ. So how much of that mindset can be, right? When you talk to Russell Wilson, I had a time to spend with him last year and really see behind the curtain and just his approach and his mentality and all that. But how do we correlate, and how do we bring that to teaching my 10-year-old son, right? It seems like on the surface, it seems like a very complicated conversation to say, hey, you need to be like Russell Wilson, you need to develop it. How do we start implementing mindset and approach and all of those characteristics through youth sports at a young age that are applicable and that are developmentally appropriate?
I love this question because two parts. One is I would hope that we don't say you should be like Russ. Yeah. You should be like Mike. You should be like whomever. Like what we want to do is to help cultivate, based on our conversations with our little people, them to be their very best, whatever that is. And it's the aspiring to it that is the magic. It's not being it necessarily. It's the want, it's the interest, it's the environment that supports the right risk-taking to be able to invite people to get right up on the edge and to love that. So before I go into the characteristics, I think this is materially important. You mentioned it earlier. Parents are one of the reasons that people leave sport. Kids leave sport before the age of 11. The majority of kids leave sport before the age of 11. It's the car ride home.
Yeah.
It's also, there's an economic thing involved in it as well. There's an access bit. There's also coaching that's involved here, good and bad. Yeah. But 11, majority of kids leave sport by 11 that feels like we are really butchering this beautiful, opportunity for kids. So the car ride home, if you're talking about the way that we have conversations with kids, this is one of the most important parts of your kid loving going for it or feeling shameful or nervous about reporting to an adult how they did. So the simple question on the car ride home is, or the simple engagement is something like this. I love watching you go for it. I just think it's so much fun to see you try to figure it out. What did you try to figure out in today's practice or today's game? As opposed to, how many points did you score? Yeah. Did you notice that Johnny scored a couple points? Yeah. Did you notice that Jane actually was able to do the double and you're still at the single? Like, what do you think that's going to happen? And so it's rewarding in the conversation the becoming. And that is the essence of how parents can show up in a meaningful way.
Well, I'm having this, and right now I'm replaying every single car ride home I had as a kid, and now every single car ride I've had with my children. And some car rides, I'll be honest, that I'm not proud of. There's been moments where looking back and reflecting and hearing you say that has all these visions bouncing back in my head where I do struggle with that. And again,
So I'm sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
you. What is the struggle?
The struggle for me, and I think this is again an important component to why this project, this You Think project, was so important to me, because not only am I thinking that I can go out and try to get all these tools and have these conversations with really interesting people who bring really unique perspective for everybody else. Selfishly, I want it for myself,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's a lot of the inspiration of this was internal, and my struggles. I grew up with a father who was my high school football coach. Love him to this day. We coached the kids. He was hard as hell on us. Our car ride home after a tough game or after the state senior year or whatever state championship loss, like we lived it 24 hours a day, and I carry a lot of that with me and find myself doing some of the things that I didn't love as a kid, and also having hopefully the perspective of saying, okay, I need to pull it back a little bit. And it's very hard for me. The way I'm wired and what always served me well as a player was intensity. Nothing was ever good enough. Continue to reach for more. Continue to practice and perform, outside of my comfort zone. The deep learning. The talent code. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but the idea of never operating in a comfort zone and failure and what lessons you could learn. Like that's always what drove me. But now I'm passing off all of these philosophies of my whole life of sports on 9 and 10-year-old kids. My 9 and 10-year-old kids, and there's times where
As an adult, trying to install, which is a very football word, right? Trying to install an operating system,
and there's times where after, Mike, I can tell you, like after it all calms down and we go to bed, like I'll lay there and be like, I didn't handle that great.